Hi, this is Crystal Hunter. For this project, I designed an app that nursing students can use to study for medical terminology tests, and I'm calling that app MEDAL. At the beginning of the project, I conducted user research by interviewing 3 nurses and nursing students. Based on my findings, I developed a user persona named Kim. She's a full-time student who's taking courses like medical terminology and anat and phys. The course loads are heavy. Students are required to learn a lot of new terms in a short amount of time. She works part-time and she studies between classes at lunch and then has longer sessions at night. She wants to memorize terms as fast as possible. As shown here, the problem statement is that she needs a scenario-based medical terminology app that she can use on the go during her limited downtime. So she's prepared to answer multiple choice style questions on her next test. She does have a few challenges. First, she has trouble remembering terms when they're not connected with a patient experience, and professors usually don't teach the terms in that context for pre-nursing classes. She also needs a refresher on Latin roots because the courses assume she knows them, and medical terminology is based on Latin suffixes, prefixes, and roots. She often feels overwhelmed by the course load of pre-nursing courses as well. So the next phase of my project, I created a task analysis and a user flow for a couple key tasks. So one was to create a library of terms, and that is shown here. And then after that, I hand sketched several iterations of low fidelity wireframes, and I used printables by SneakPeekit. Next, I used those wireframes as a reference when drawing up some mid-fidelity wireframes using a tool called Prot. I'll give you a quick tour of this prototype. During the usability test, I had them go through 4 tasks, and the first one was to sign up. So it was pretty simple. I just had them click sign up. I watched them go through that onboarding process pretty quickly. And then the second scenario, they were supposed to create a new library of terms. So if they were to go through a test, let's say for cells and tissues, how would they go about it? So what I was hoping for is they would click on this library icon. They would either create a new library, add some terms to it, add it to the library, and then they would be done. The third task was to create a new study plan, and ideally they would click on the clock app. They would create a new study plan. They would add libraries. They would set the test date. They would decide whether to keep push notifications on, how often they would want to study per day, and they'd be done. And then the final test was, or the final task of the usability test was to study it in the context of a patient experience. So if they click study, they can choose whether they want to study via flashcards, a patient experience, quizzes. So if they started, they would go through the interaction. So this one's a flashcard. They would move on to the next, which this is the patient experience. So there would be an excerpt of a mock patient file up here. They'd be asked to select the area of the body described in the file, and they would receive feedback. And then here's some multiple choice quizzes. So those were the tasks that they were to do. Now, as part of the usability test, I conducted it with 3 people, including a nurse and a nursing student who I had interviewed previously. And then I also involved a training director. I used the script shown here on the left to conduct each test, and each test was about 10 minutes long. Participants, again, completed these 4 tasks here that I already went through. I received some great feedback, and I categorized it by task. So when it says task 1, this was for creating a new account. I did get some feedback saying more text explanation throughout the app would be helpful, and I rated that as a severity level 1. So the higher the level, the more severe the issue is. I do feel like for that particular feedback, if someone were to go through a fully fleshed out onboarding screen, a lot of the confusion would have been cleared up. But I did add some brief text at the top of certain screens, like the My Library screen and the Adding New Terms screen. So I've already gone through and implemented this revision cycle into a new and updated prototype. So for instance, now when you're on the My Libraries page, I have a little bit of introductory text here that says, want to add libraries to your collection? And then instead of a second search bar, some were confused that there was a search bar up here and then again down here. I converted it into a button that says Find Libraries. And then instead of small text, I had small text right underneath the title that had a plus sign, Create New. Some users found it hard to find that, so instead I created another button here that said Create New. So that's just a couple examples of some improvements that I made as a result of the usability test. As far as what I've learned, I learned that research-driven user personas help teams to keep their needs at the forefront of the design and development, so you don't get off task, you don't forget what the priority is to the user. I also learned, wireframes and prototypes don't have to look perfect to serve their purposes. During usability testing, I had a couple snags. Some of the scenarios that I wrote were inconsistent with the default settings on the screens in the prototype. So for instance, if I said, okay, create a study plan where you would study 15 minutes a day, and then the screen, the default was 10 minutes, and I didn't have it interactive to where they could change it to 15. Some of the users got a little confused about that. So I would be creating simpler scenarios that were consistent with the default settings. The other thing I would stress more in the usability script was to just explain very clearly that this prototype is a stick figure version, and the user interface will get a facelift later in the process. I'm really happy with how the project went. I learned a lot, and I can't wait to apply it to future projects.